I'd like to welcome everyone today to our talk on the road to college, admission and financial aid. We are so honored to have you join us here today. My name is Erin Brown and I work in the Bates Advancement Office, and you can see from the name on the screen, I'm also the parent of an incoming first year. My son Quinn will be joining me on campus in the fall. We are thrilled to be joined today by Director of Student Financial Services, Wendy Glass, and Director of Admission, Darryl Uy. Unfortunately, I know that Leigh Weisenburger's name was originally on the invitation, but due to family circumstances, she was not able to join us today, but she sends her regards. And without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Darryl.
Great. Thanks, Erin. Hi, everybody. Great to be here with all of you. I wish we could be in person, but this is a great alternative instead to at least engage and interact and be a part of a reunion this year. Before we start our presentation, I'm just going to pass it over to Wendy so that she can introduce herself as well. So.
Thanks, Darryl, and hello to all of you. It's nice to be here with you today. My name is Wendy Glass. I'm the Director of Student Financial Services, and my colleagues and I work very closely with Darryl and Leigh, particularly in the first 6 months of the calendar year. But truly, we have a great partnership, and we're looking forward to sharing information with you today. I am not a graduate of Bates College, but I do have a very strong connection to Bates. My husband was in the class of 1988, and my daughter graduated in May of 2020 from Bates.
Great. So we just have a few slides to share, and we'll talk about sort of the current landscape of admissions and how the pandemic affected Bates specifically, and the work that we do, both admission and in terms of student financial services. And sort of the class that we just enrolled. But we're also happy to answer any other questions that may be on your mind after our presentation. So just to get started, I will share my screen. So hopefully you can all see this. But yeah, so just to give you some background before we dive into all these numbers. Prior to the pandemic, we had 2 exceptional years at Bates in terms of applications. With 3 years ago, it was over 8,000 applications, and then 2 years ago, it was, or last year, it was 7,900 applications. So we were looking and looking ahead, thinking that we were going to hopefully hit 8,000 again. But given the pandemic, things changed pretty drastically and quickly that we had to rethink our goals. We thought that because of travel restrictions that we would lose most of our international applicant pool, which makes up about 1/3 of the pool itself, with anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 applications just from international students. So with that in mind, our target was just going to be 6,000 this coming year or this past year. So we were happily surprised when we hit 7,319 applications. So it was the 4th largest applicant pool that Bates has ever seen. And that was just a happy surprise given the uncertainty of the pandemic and what we didn't know how many students would be actually willing to travel to Maine from around the world. So as you continue down the slide in terms of the numbers, you can see that we had admitted 17%. So it was about 1,200 overall between all 3 rounds of early decision 1, early decision 2, and regular decision. And about 60% of the early decision students were admitted. So what does that mean? It seems high, knowing that in the last few years, the admit rate for early decision was only around 30%. But we were down in applications in early decision this year by about 30%. So in the end, the number that we admitted during early decision was around the same, but the percent was a lot higher just because the pool was a lot smaller. We were getting worried because the numbers of applications that were coming in for regular were pretty slow this year, just because of the pandemic. There's not a lot of counseling that students were getting. They wanted more time to fill out their applications, to talk to their counselors in high school, talk to their parents. They weren't able to visit colleges. So there was just a lot of trepidation in terms of hitting submits and applying to colleges this year, not just at Bates, but across the country. And given when we were in the fall, given the slow numbers of regular decision applications, we were actually thinking that we needed to admit more students in early decision, just given the uncertainty of what was going to come down the pike for regular. So we ended up taking more than 300 students in early decision 1 and early decision 2. So mind you, our class size is only 500. So with over 300 of them coming from ED1 and ED2, that was over 60% of the class coming from for the first 2 rounds. In addition, because of the pandemic, the class of 2024, 54 students from the class of 2024 decided to take a gap year. And they were going to be joining us for this class of 2025 instead. So 300 plus another 50-ish. That's a big percent of the class coming in already from ED1, ED2, and gap years. So not leaving a lot of room in the end for regular decision. So it became pretty selective come regular decision. The other thing to think about was during the first part of the pandemic was also it affected in terms of yields for the class of 2024. And of the 1,000 students that we admitted in regular decision for 2020, only 100 people said yes. So only 10%. It was pretty small, and we had to go to the wait list pretty heavily last summer. And we didn't want to be in that position again. So that's another reason why we went deep into our early decision 1 and 2 rounds for a larger class size. So that's kind of where we landed. Total class right now, the slide says 581, but we've melted a few students over the last few weeks, and we're down to 566 right now. So we're working with student affairs and residential life, who they're happy with our accomplishments, but they're not too happy with the size because they're trying to figure out where they're going to fit everybody on campus next year, and how first-year seminars are going to work out given the large first-year class that's going to be joining us. We expect there's going to be some more what we call melt over the next few weeks until the first day of orientation. There was a conference yesterday where we heard from other colleagues within the NESCAC and other peer institutions that they are also over-enrolled. But the theory is that several students have deposited in multiple institutions and are waiting for the summer to finally be able to go visit schools that they were admitted to, that they were not able to do back in the spring or during the school year. So once they visit schools, we expect some students will finally make a decision and then withdraw or rescind their deposit here at Bates or at other institutions. And some of these numbers will hopefully drop down even lower before the first day of classes. So, and then the other, so that was the class that we admitted. In terms of who we enrolled, the class of 2025 is actually shaping out to be the most academically talented and the most diverse class in Bates's history. So they hail from currently about 445 different high schools from 36 states, DC, and 32 different countries from around the world. The number of Black, Indigenous, or people of color, percent-wise, is the same as the last few years, but the actual N, the number of students is the highest we've ever seen, which is about 160. So again, the most diverse class racially that we will welcome this fall, which is great. Same is true for first generation to college, as well as Pell eligible students. And those numbers, again, percentage-wise, same as last year, but the actual number of students in the class, 74 for first gen and 55 for Pell eligible, is also the highest number that we've seen for those 2 cohorts, which is great. And in terms of the right side of the screen, the academic grading, just to give you some background, the left side column, the 1 through 10, is our academic rating, and every file is given some kind of academic rating, 1 being the highest, 10 being the lowest. You can see most of our students fall within a 3 to 6 range, and that's usually anywhere from like a 3.6 to a 4.0 GPA, with testing falling in the 1370 to 1470 range. So it's pretty compressed in terms of what's the difference between a 1, a 2, or even a 5 and a 6. So, but you can see that we take students from all different ranges, all the way even to the bottom of the 9s and the 10s. But that is, they're still academically strong students, with a B plus average. So they can still handle and manage Bates work and the curriculum here. So at this point, I'm happy to answer other questions after I pass it over to Wendy, but she'll have some information about sort of student financial aid as well.
Thanks, Darryl. So in student financial services, all the while that Darryl and his team were reading applications, we were also reviewing applications, and doing so we were also a bit uncertain as to what we would encounter as we were reviewing applications, given how the pandemic really upended plans, finances for so many families. Our budget this year for the incoming class was $10.3 million. It was an increase over the budget for the class last year. And that was due in part to our expectation that we would need to spend some additional resources for students in this incoming class. We were very pleased when we came in within 1% of our budget. So our budget of $10.3 million, we came in just under $10.2 million. And while there will continue to be some shifts, I'm sure, as the year goes on, as we get closer to the start of the school year, we are well within, and actually, I mean, right on our target budget. So that's very good news. For this class, for the class of 2025, the average financial need increased only a few $100s. That's also a bit to our surprise. So the average financial need for this class is just under $54,000. And just to provide some clarification and context, what we define financial need to be is the difference between our total cost of education, including both the fees that we charge and the indirect expenses that students have for things like books and travel and personal expenses, and the amount that the family, we determine that a family is capable of paying. So in this instance, our total costs for the upcoming year, factoring in all of those direct and indirect expenses, ranges from $77,800 to over $78,000. So the average need is around $54,000. And then the average grant for this cohort is a little over $50,000. And you may ask yourself, what is the difference between financial need and the average grant? That is simply, the difference is that we expect all students to contribute to their costs by something called self-help. And so we meet a portion of their need with a small student loan. For incoming students, it's $2,000. And then also we offer campus employment. So students can earn up to $1,700 through campus employment. The percentage of students in the class receiving need-based grant is about 35%, although that percentage has probably increased since we've seen some melt. So the number of students receiving grant aid is very consistent with what we typically experience from one year to the next. We typically have a range of about 200 to 215 students in any entering class receiving need-based grant aid, and we are at 202 right now. The percentage of students qualifying for Pell Grants, we're actually at around 10%, given the melt that Darryl alluded to a few moments ago. We have 55 students who are Pell eligible. Again, the percentage, we would like to have it be higher. A lot of our peer institutions have a higher percentages of students who are eligible for Pell Grant. But we are very pleased with the number of students. We enrolled 40 students last year who were eligible for Pell. This year we've enrolled 54 or 55 rather. And the reason why that percentage is important is that it is increasingly seen as a reflection of the college's commitment to accessibility and social mobility. So we'd like to see that percentage increase. Now, as far as the breakdown of our aid recipients, the share of financial aid resources going to BIPOC students and US majority students is roughly equivalent, about 44% and 45% respectively. And then we also provide significant financial aid to our non-US citizens. About 11% of the total number of aid recipients are from other countries. So that is sort of a synopsis of the class of 2025. For our office, I mentioned earlier that we are very much, we spend the bulk of our time working from January to the end of May with the incoming class. Our office is now shifting our attention very much towards our continuing students. We are currently reviewing, we have about 625 applications that we're reviewing for continuing students, and we'll be notifying those students of their financial aid decisions next week, which is early for us, and we're very pleased to be able to give students this information as early as possible for planning purposes. We're also looking forward, our office, to the return of a more traditional semester format. Last year, while we were enrolling the class, we were also working very hard to support our current students. We were supporting students who for the first time were studying remotely. We were processing lots of refunds and adjustments for students. And we're very much looking forward to hopefully returning to a more normal semester this fall.
Great. And similarly to Wendy's team in admission, we are all eager to be back on the road and to be able to travel and recruit like we have in the past. This past year, we were all remote, and that was hard for the work that we do because admissions is all about sort of the personal connection and getting to know students and meeting them in their spaces and in their places and trying to understand their context of where they go to school and their neighborhoods. So we are hoping to be able to do that this fall. We've been closed to visitors all year during the pandemic, but starting next Monday, will be the first day that we will be opening up campus to guests and visitors again. So that will be great. We have about 26 families registered for our first day on Monday. And we're limiting it to, we're only doing campus tours. We're not doing information sessions or interviews in person. Those will still be done virtually. But 4 times a day, so 9, 11, 1, and 3, with 8 families being able to register for each tour spot. So 32 families a day. And each family would be paired with 1 tour guide. So very individualized, experienced with a current student. But we're all excited to sort of welcome and sort of be face to face with prospective families starting next week. And that will go through August, right before the first years come. And then we'll have to reassess what we're going to be able to do in the fall once our students are back. So, but exciting times, never a dull moment in admission or student financial services. So, yeah. But at this point, are there questions that either Wendy or I could answer about anything that we discussed or anything else on your mind? Whether it's about the admission or financial aid process or the class, anything else?
And you can feel free to unmute and ask your question directly, or as I said at the beginning, go ahead and type it in the chat, and Darryl or Wendy will answer it for you. And thank you so much, Darryl and Wendy. It's exciting, all exciting information to hear, especially as a P25. So thank you for putting that together.
Great.
Lynn, go ahead.
I had a question about the admit rate of EDs. Is it 60% of those who applied ED were admitted, or is it 60% of the incoming class applied by ED?
Sure. So yeah, 60% is a number used twice. So 60% of the ED applicant pool was admitted.
Wow.
In addition, 60% of the first year class came from ED1 and ED2.
Okay.
So you didn't, yeah, you were not confused. You heard 60% twice. So
It seems high. That seems high.
it was for the class in terms of admitting the portion of the applicant pool. Again, we were down 30% in ED1 and ED2. So the number that we admitted was the same as the last 3 years. But because of the smaller applicant pools in ED1 and ED2, the percent that we admitted is higher.
Do you have any sense of our peer institutions having similar aberrations?
Yeah, in terms of percent of the class filled, there are more and more schools, just given what happened last year and the uncertainty of the pandemic, there are more and more schools that were above the 50%, closer to the 60% range coming from ED1 and or ED2. I don't know what their ED pools were looking like, so I don't know if the percent was as high as ours in terms of the rate. But in terms of number that that are coming in from ED1 and ED2, they also are looking at again 50 to 60%. Again, their class size could be a lot bigger or a lot smaller than our 500.
Yep. And the class is standing right now at 581, and I know there will be, I should just say, full disclosure here, I was a college admission consultant and also college counselor, starting the program at an inner city charter school in Salem, Massachusetts. So, so I have a little more behind the scenes, I guess. But by how many are we over enrolled at this point?
Yeah, so that slide is old already. So that 581 has melted down to 566. And our target is technically 500, but it's if we are, but the 500 is for what we call census date, which is October 1st. And so if we can melt down to 500 by October 1st, we will be in good shape. But if we are, Leigh is imagining if we can get to at least 560 or below. She's worked out with Josh McIntosh and Res Life that although bigger than we expected or want, the college would be able to manage that.
It'll be comfortable by the time fall rolls around.
Darryl, it looks like we have some questions in the chat. Okay. Nora is asking about next year's recruiting and how that might be impacted.
Sure, great question, Nora. We are also imagining, trying to think about that. We have a staff retreat session tomorrow morning, specifically about recruiting and how that's going to play out. We don't imagine that it will be fully in person. So some of the virtual programming that we offered this year, we will probably most likely continue with those as well. And so it will be a hybrid. I feel like that is going to be the new word this coming cycle. So last year it was pivoting, this year it's going to be hybrid. And we will find a mix of both in-person travel recruiting, but also some virtual opportunities as well. And the other thing is, as much as we want to travel, on the admissions side, it really depends on what schools and school districts will allow us to do. So there are some schools that I've heard, even though they will be in person as a high school, they may not welcome admissions folks who are traveling around the country, around the world to enter into their community this fall. So it really depends on what we are going to be able to do depending on school districts. But we are planning to still do interviews, do information sessions, and offer tours either in person or virtually. So all those things will be options. And we continue to partner with other institutions and do what we call group recruitment. So larger presentations where we can reach a wider audience of prospective students, families, as well as high school counselors, rather than just a presentation just by Bates, where it could be smaller in size. So it allows us to provide more access and reach a wider group of people all at the same time. So.
And then we have another question here about test scores. I believe Bates has never required test scores, but in light of that change this year for many schools, did you notice a change in your applicant review process?
Sure, great question. And that was definitely a hot topic this past year. So Bates has been test optional for over 35 years, since 1984. And thankfully, because we were one of the first schools that went test optional, the pandemic didn't really affect us in terms of admission evaluation. Unfortunately, because so many other schools went test optional this year, we kind of lost sort of our marketplace and our stronghold as a test optional viable school for a lot of students. There are many students that felt like, oh, X, Y, and Z, Harvard, Yale, Princeton are all test optional, so we might as well just apply just to see. So we lost a lot of students, particularly during early decision 1 and 2, who normally would have applied to us, but because they had so many other options this year, because over 70% of all institutions around the country went test optional this year, there were so many more choices for students. But because so many students were applying to all these test optional schools and they weren't admitting more, they all heard some unfortunate news come early decision, and then we saw them in regular decision. So that's where we saw a huge increase in applications, thankfully this year, and got us to that 7,300 plus. So for us, we saw a less than 5% decrease in applications because of the test optional marketplace. But it really didn't change how we read applications, but I know some schools turned to us because we've been such a leader and a pioneer in the test optional movement. They reached out to multiple staff members in the office and asked us how we read applications, and they wanted to know sort of tips and tricks and sort of just the process of how they read or how they should read applications in a test optional world these days. To be completely transparent, because of so many schools going test optional, trying to figure out what is the next step, and in the name of access and equity and inclusion, the college is having conversations about going test blind or test free. So that is sort of the next level in the test optional movement, where if we became test free, we would not even look at or consider any kind of standardized testing. Even if a student submitted them in their application, we wouldn't consider it in our evaluation. We're not there yet, but we're just having those initial conversations right now with campus partners around the college.
And Darryl, sorry, another one for you.
Fine.
Is the admissions percentage the same for ED1 and ED2, or does it drop?
It all depends on the size, and ED1 will always be bigger. It has been traditionally a larger pool compared to ED2. So the admit rate and the number just drops pretty drastically between ED1 and ED2. But total, again, 60% of the class came from those two rounds.
Any other questions out there?
Hey, Darryl and Wendy, it's Karen. Sorry, I have signal issues. We had some storms that wreaked havoc with Wi-Fi, so my camera is off.
No worries.
And some alarms, they've been surged. So if you hear weird beeping, it's a residual effect of the storms. A couple questions. One, You spoke certainly, and I know I've asked this, but I can't find my notes, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself. If you can speak to the breakout of financial aid award, you discussed the breakout, certainly the 60% to 40% ED to regular. If you can talk about where the number of applicants or the number of admits where the financial aid awards proportionate. So, what were the numbers in ED basically of those admitted at needing aid and those enrolling needing aid, understanding there's confidentiality components here versus regular, just from an accessibility standpoint is one. And then, and Wendy, this may be a question for you, that one. And then the second part is, as you look at the initial conversations, understanding it may be premature with regard to absolutely no testing required. Certainly that has an impact on where, the tail that wags the dog, the rankings. Have you heard any conversation or discussion around changing in those metrics, changing in those KPIs, especially seeing as though this is going to be a 3-year trend, not just for Bates, but for, nationally for any school impacted. So is there a movement to actually shift those metrics? Sorry to throw a fire hose at you. I'm trying to get it in before anything loses.
So Karen, those are great questions. I'll try to take the aid question, and I'm just trying to pull up some of my notes so that I can give you the information that you're looking for. But in terms of the amount that we spent during the early decision rounds, we spent almost half, just under half of our financial aid resources in supporting students who were accepted during ED 1 and 2. So yes, so they represent a slightly larger share of the overall admit pool, and we spent just under 50% of our resources supporting those students. In terms of the average grant, it's pretty comparable for early decision students. The average, let's see, I'm looking at, there are probably some variations, slight variations that are just the nature of you're looking at different cohorts of students and the numbers are different. But the average grant for our early decision students is around the $50,000 mark as well. Let me just confirm that. Yeah, so for our all students in the class, it's 50,000 and change, and then it was over 48,000 for our early decision students. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, sorry, you would think at this point with Zoom, I'd figure out the mute button. Sorry, I started talking without taking mute. Yeah, it does. I was looking more just for proportionality. So around the equity issue. Seeing as though those numbers are, is it proportionate? Because clearly, students who come into the ED cycle, then data shows us that certainly there's more awareness, there's more guidance, they're just at different, there are different variables that impact the decision to go ED versus regular. So just trying to understand proportionality of those who can fully pay versus those who need aid, and make, an understanding proportionality between that applicant, those admission cycles versus regular for access.
I think that, just to follow up, I think that in the past, we definitely saw there were more significant variances between the early decision pool and the regular decision pool in terms of the amount of aid that families were requesting or the amount of need that they demonstrated. And some of those factors that you mentioned were certainly at play. But in the last several years, what we've seen encouragingly is that our pools resemble each other quite a bit in terms of their socioeconomic diversity. So, and as I said, they're roughly proportionate. So.
Fantastic. Yeah, I just wasn't sure if last year was an anomaly, but I will give you a shout out. Having fortunate to know Wendy for quite some time. For those on the call, Wendy will learn from one of the best, Leigh Campbell, and is one of the most highly regarded and well thought out, fair financial aid, wise advisors in the industry. So we are very fortunate at Bates to have her leading that arm. And I know from friends, both Bates alums and non, that they have been absolutely had only glowing words about working with you, even if it wasn't the package they had hoped for. They still had just such kind words about how helpful you and your team were. So thanks.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Karen.
And Karen, to answer your second question about test-free and the rankings, that is definitely part of the conversations that we're having. We have reached out to U.S. News and World Report to understand how they plan to incorporate schools who have decided to go test-free into their evaluation. And in typical U.S. News and World Report fashion, they gave a very vague, unhelpful response. So it is still unclear, but there are currently 54 schools out of the 4,000 plus that have gone test-free. So no one within NESCAC so far, but the entire UC system has decided to go test-free, and a few other sort of state systems too. I think Maryland was the other one, and other institutions. So we're still talking about it, but it's not just an admissions decision. We're talking to institutional research and the president's office and Mike Hussey, part of the president's cabinet, faculty, athletics. So everybody is kind of a stakeholder in the conversation. So nothing yet, but hopefully we will have more to share once we figure out and once we hear back from U.S. News and World Report. So yes, I agree, Karen, that it is unfortunate that we have to worry about that organization and the rankings. So.
Jonathan?
Oh, yes. My daughter actually had a question.
I'm in the also international school, international baccalaureate program, the IB program, and I just wondered how Bates handles the IB in admissions, and with applying internationally, are there any differences in the process?
Sure. Bates, we love the IB, especially if you're doing the full diploma, but we think that it's obviously if it's offered, we will consider that the most rigorous curriculum offered at your school. So the fact that you're pursuing that shows us that you are challenging yourself in high school, which is great. I think the other good thing is the extended essay, which is just a really good training, if you will, for the Bates senior thesis. And sort of there's the service part as well to the IB, which also fall in lines well with our community engagement sort of ethos here at Bates. So all of that is really good preparation and a really good fit for the Bates curriculum, but also just as a Bates student and a Bates community member. Internationally, application-wise, nope, there's not much of a difference in terms of applying. It's the same application, and we read you within the context of the school that you attend. Financial aid-wise, it's a little different, but in terms of admissions, no, there's not much of a difference. I don't know, Wendy, if you have anything else to share.
Well, if the question is in terms of the differences in how we meet need for international students versus domestic students, we meet need just a little bit differently for international students who are non-US citizens. We meet need with institutional grant and campus employment, but we do not include a student loan because international students are not able to access that type of funding. But in all other regards, we meet 100% of the need of all of the students that we admit.
Yeah, thank you, Wendy. Actually, we are U.S. citizens.
Okay.
So,
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, though.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other last minute questions for Darryl and Wendy? Well, again, thank you both. This has been an incredibly helpful and informative presentation, and we thank all the reunion attendees as well. There's still a few more days left of reunion programming, so please jump on and take advantage of all of the things you can virtually until we're able to join together on campus in person again. Thank you. And thank you, Amy Jefferson, who also works in advancement and is running our tech today.